When the forward pass entered football, it solved a problem the sport didn't yet know how to name. The game had survived violence. It had survived reform. It had survived public outrage. But survival wasn't enough. Football needed to be seen, and the forward pass made that possible. Before the forward pass, football happened in crowds. Bodies collapsed inward. Action disappeared into mass. Spectators watched movement, not moments. The game was felt more than understood. What the forward pass introduced wasn't finesse. It was clarity. A thrown ball creates space. Space creates anticipation. For the first time, a football play unfolded in stages. The drop back, the release, the arc, the arrival. Crowds could follow it. Newspapers could describe it. Fans could remember it. Football became legible. Legibility changes value. When people can see what's happening, they can judge it. When they can judge it, they can compare it. When they can compare it, they can argue about it. Debate creates attachment. Attachment creates loyalty. Loyalty creates demand. By the 1910s, college football was no longer a campus activity. It was regional entertainment. Large stadiums were built not for students, but for crowds. Game days reshaped cities. Rivalries became annual events. The forward pass didn't make football popular. It made popularity scalable. As popularity grew, so did differentiation. Some players could throw, some could catch, some could read space before it opened. These players stood out, not just to coaches, to crowds. Football began producing recognizable figures. Once a sport produces recognizable individuals, anonymity disappears. Fans stopped watching just the team. They followed quarterbacks. They remembered names. They argued about decisions. The sport had stars, and stars change economics. Officially, football remained amateur. Unofficially, the market had already formed. Crowds paid admission, newspapers sold extra copies, local businesses benefited. Everyone around the game made money, everyone except the players. This imbalance could hold only as long as players remained interchangeable. The forward pass changed that. A dominant runner could be replaced. A skilled passer could not. Specialization gave leverage, and leverage always demands compensation. Colleges resisted this reality. Amateurism wasn't just tradition, it was control. Paying players meant admitting labor. Admitting labor meant negotiation. Negotiation meant power shifting away from institutions. So colleges pretended nothing had changed. But outside the universities, nothing prevented payment. Industrial towns didn't have donors or ideals to protect. They had crowds to entertain. They had pride to defend. Athletic clubs became the next frontier. These clubs already sponsored baseball, boxing, and track. Football was just another attraction. They rented fields, they sold tickets, they invited opponents, and quietly, they paid players. At first, payment was subtle. Travel expenses, temporary jobs, single game fees. The forward pass made games watchable enough that people didn't question why certain players kept appearing. They just wanted to see them again. Once money entered football, it created gravity. Players followed it. Teams competed for it. Communities justified it. The question was no longer whether football should be paid. It was who would control the payment. Football began drifting away from colleges not because of rebellion, but because of opportunity. Weekday games, exhibition matches, town versus town contests. The forward pass allowed football to travel, and traveling sports find markets. Professionalism didn't arrive as a declaration, it arrived as a convenience. Why risk injury for nothing when crowds were paying anyway? Why protect amateur ideals when spectators didn't care? Football followed attention, attention followed clarity. As games spread, so did inconsistency. Rules varied, payments varied, champions were disputed. Some teams stacked rosters for single games, others folded after losses. The sport grew, but unevenly. This instability wasn't a failure, it was a signal. The game had outgrown informal agreement. Just as the forward pass organized the field, football now needed organization off it. Players wanted reliability, teams wanted protection, fans wanted legitimacy. A paid game without structure invites chaos. Chaos scares investment. Football had seen this before. The same pressure that forced role reform now pushed toward professionalism. Not to make football safer, not to make it fairer, but to make it survivable at scale. Every paid game reinforced the same truth. Football wasn't a school activity anymore. It was a product, and products don't remain unpaid for long. What emerged next wasn't a league yet. It was understanding. Understanding that football could no longer pretend to be amateur while operating like entertainment. Understanding that visibility demanded accountability. Understanding that money requires rules. As had already proven something essential. Change didn't destroy football. It refined it. That lesson carried forward. If the sport could survive innovation, it could survive payment. This transition created tension. Colleges distanced themselves. Fans debated legitimacy. Newspapers questioned integrity. But none of it slowed demand. Football had momentum. The forward pass gave football vision. Professionalism would give it permanence. One changed how the game looked. The other would change how it lasted. Before leagues, before contracts, before governance, there was recognition. Recognition that football had crossed a threshold. Once crossed, there was no return to innocence. The paid player wasn't the beginning of professional football. He was the consequence. The consequence of clarity, the consequence of popularity, the consequence of spectatorship. Football didn't become professional because it wanted to. It became professional because it was seen. The forward pass made the game visible. Visibility created stars. Stars created leverage. Leverage demanded money. Professional football wasn't invented. It emerged. Momentum doesn't need permission. It only needs direction, and direction requires structure. Professional football didn't start with ambition. It started with realism. People were watching. People were paying. People were remembering names. The rest was just paperwork waiting to happen. American football became a structured sport at the college level. But a question lingered. Could this game become a career, a profession? In the late 1800s, payment to players was seen as disreputable, but as interest grew, so did the pressure to turn skill into income. This is the story of how football stepped out of college fields and into paid competition. In 1892, a watershed moment occurred in Pennsylvania. The Allegheny Athletic Association secretly paid William Pudge Heffelfinger $500 to play a game against the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. That payment, explicit compensation, marks the first known instance of a player being paid to play football. Heffelfinger's touchdown that day was more than a winning run. It signaled a shift. Football had stopped being solely a pastime for unpaid athletes. Professional pay, once taboo, revealed a tension between ideals of sport and the reality of public interest in competition. 3 years later, in 1895, the town of Latrobe, Pennsylvania hosted what is considered the first fully professional football game. The Latrobe Athletic Association openly paid its players, including quarterback John Brallier, who admitted he was paid $10 plus expenses to play. Despite these early milestones, professional football was not yet organized nationally. Teams sprang up independently, often in industrial towns where athletic clubs sponsored local play. Pay was inconsistent, and the sport still lacked formal league structure. By 1897, the Latrobe Athletic Association had paid all its players for a full season, becoming the first entirely professional team. This small industrial town suddenly stood at the forefront of a new era, football as a livelihood, rather than a hobby. Clubs like the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club paid players, including Heffelfinger later in the decade. Though professional play increased, many still viewed it as unsporting compared to college football, which maintained strict amateur ideals. Though short-lived, the 1900 league demonstrated the appeal of organized professional play. It also showed the sport's commercial possibilities and the audience interest in professional matches, even if the business model wasn't sustainable yet. In the 1900s, professional football spread into the Midwest. Ohio became a hub, with towns like Canton, Akron, Massillon, and Dayton fielding strong independent teams. These loosely connected clubs formed what historians call the Ohio League, a precursor to national organization. By the late 1910s, professional teams were competing for players and audiences, but there was still no overarching league. Salaries varied, teams folded frequently, and there was no agreed system to determine champions. The sport needed organization. Professional football's rise was not smooth. A 1906 betting scandal between the Canton Bulldogs and the Massillon Tigers rocked the Ohio League, tarnishing reputations and disrupting regional play. Still, the game kept growing. On September 17, 1920, representatives from teams across Ohio and nearby states met in Canton, Ohio, at the Hopmobile showroom owned by Ralph Hay. They formed the American Professional Football Association, which would later be renamed the National Football League in 1922. 11 teams agreed to terms. The Akron Pros, Canton Bulldogs, Chicago Cardinals, Decatur Staleys, and more, clubs representing small towns and big cities. Jim Thorpe was elected the league's first president, giving the new association early prestige. The AFA sought to end bidding wars for players, prevent use of college athletes, and standardize competition. But financial instability and limited audience reach meant the league struggled in its first seasons. In 1922, the APFA adopted the name National Football League. This rebranding was part of a broader effort to establish a permanent, credible National Professional Football League. For years, the NFL champion was determined by standings. In 1933, the league introduced a formal championship game between division winners, creating a playoff structure and adding legitimacy to professional competition. Despite early instability, by the mid-1930s, professional football began gaining traction with fans. Rival leagues like the short-lived American Football League of 1936-37 showed interest in the sport, even if they folded quickly. A later watershed moment, the 1958 NFL Championship, would further elevate the professional game and television's role. But even before that, the NFL had begun its long evolution from a chaotic regional sport into a national institution. Professional football shifted how Americans saw the game, no longer purely college spectacle. Fans now followed careers, rivalries, and local pride. Paychecks and contracts made players celebrities and teams community icons. Early pro football hardly resembled today's multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Many teams folded within a few years, and attendance lagged compared with baseball. Yet the business model, paying players, selling tickets, proved resilient. Some franchises endured. The Chicago Bears and Arizona Cardinals traced their origins back to those early years, making them among the oldest professional football organizations still operating today. Radio and then television brought professional football into homes nationwide. Broadcasts helped transform the NFL from a regional curiosity into a national spectacle, a transition that would only accelerate after World War II. Figures like Red Grange boosted pro football's appeal. When college stars turned professional in the 1920s, crowds followed their every game, signaling that talent, not just team loyalty, drove fan interest. The NFL struggled with racial integration early on, excluding black players in the late 1920s before reintegrating after World War II. This shift broadened the talent pool and helped professional football reflect the nation's changing culture. The AFL of the 1960s challenged the NFL's dominance, forcing innovations in recruitment, television contracts, and competition. Their eventual merger in 1970 created the two-conference structure and laid the groundwork for today's Super Bowl era. By the late 20th century, professional football overtook baseball and college football in popularity. Its weekly rhythms, broadcast reach, and cultural events like the Super Bowl cemented its status as America's dominant sport. Professional football's origin was not inevitable. It emerged through trial, error, and incremental structure. But the next chapter, how televised football and the Super Bowl reshaped society, would elevate the game far beyond its modest beginnings. If you found this useful, give the video a like. It helps the series reach more people who care about the history of the game. Subscribe for weekly documentaries on how football was built, the rules, the systems, and the decisions that shaped it. We'll pick up the story next week.